Myth busting for the Tennessee Titans. That's what we're covering on today's podcast. Prevailing national thought, even some thoughts just by Titans fans, the common consensus out there about who the Tennessee Titans will be in 2024 and why some of these prevailing thoughts are wrong. That and more on today's Music City Audible podcast. Let's get to it. Oh, welcome everyone to another episode of the Music City Audible podcast presented by Broadway Sports Media in partnership with 440 Sports. I'm Justin Graver. With me, as always, Justin Melo. Training camp is underway. Titans, players, rookies, and veterans reported yesterday on Tuesday, so that is happening now. And today, what we're talking about here as we get everyone ready for what's about to become just a timeline full of training camp clips and tweets and whatever. Let's bust some myths today, Justin, because I think there's a lot of, consensus thought out there about what the Titans will be in this 2024 season, whether it's how good they will be, what the offense will look like, how good the skill players are. We're going to bust some myths today. I'm excited for this. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I actually was just eating a bunch of watermelon while I was sitting here waiting to see what kind of bullshit you conjured up for today. No, I'm kidding. I love doing this show with you, and I'm excited to see what you've got. And we've got some good myths that's a hard thing to say. We've got some good myths to bust.
Yes.
We talked about it a little before the show started, and we're just going to roll with it. There are a couple that really pissed me off, and a couple of negative thoughts that I might actually agree with.
All right, so the first myth we're going to bust here today as we get into this episode presented by Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville and Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville. More on Sinkers Beverages to come in a little bit. And a real quick shout out to the YouTube audience. We appreciate all of you out there for watching, subscribing, especially commenting. The comments, you guys are just absolutely killing it with the Tighten Up, boosting the algorithm. Somebody commented on our last video last week, comment. It's like, that's amazing. We love it. Thank you so much. But if you're here, make sure, if you're not already, subscribe to the Music City Audible channel. Give this video a thumbs up and turn on channel alerts so you get a notification every time we drop a new video. We really appreciate you guys for helping this channel grow. We're almost to 2,000 subscribers, so keep hitting that button, push us over the edge before football season starts. We really appreciate it. But anyway, Justin, the first myth we're going to bust here today is that this Titans offense is not good from a fantasy football perspective. And I'm going to reference a tweet that I saw last week here. A fantasy football analyst, Sam Hoppen, put this out, trying to build his own NFL team ratings. He credits this idea to an account at WhaleCapper and at AndyMSFW to use fantasy football ADP, average draft position, as a proxy to rank teams by their skill position strength. So basically, it's like Christian McCaffrey is the number one ADP right now, average draft position pick in fantasy. The Niners are first on this list. Obviously, they've got guys like Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk for now. I'm assuming we're recording this a little in advance, so hopefully Brandon Ayuk doesn't get traded between now and this podcast coming out. And George Kittle, obviously the Niners should be number one, I think, in real football terms and in fantasy football ADP terms, right? So a little background there.
To quickly clarify, I don't think people are confused, but in case they are, this list is legit based on ADPs. This is not just the opinion of those three guys that you mentioned. No, this is actual ADP evidence from major fantasy football outlets.
Exactly. So the Titans come in at 21st on this list, which would imply that they are the 21st best skill group of players. And we're talking, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends as a skill group, right? And the people who put this out, Sam Hoppen who put this out, thinks that this is a pretty good gauge of actual NFL skill position groups and how they should be ranked, and that the Niners should be first and the Lions should be second and the Chiefs are around sixth. He thinks this is a good list, which means I'm inferring that he thinks the Titans are appropriately ranked at 21st. We're talking about a team that just added Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, and Tyler Boyd over the offseason to go along with DeAndre Hopkins, Tajay Spears. Whatever you think of the tight end room, they're probably not a top 10 tight end room in the NFL, but they're about average, I would say, if Chigakonkwo can continue to look like he did more as a rookie, and if Josh Wiley takes a step. I think it's early to put the tight end room up there for sure. But when it comes to the wide receivers and the running backs, these are proven players. DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley especially, proven wide receiver one caliber talents. How are the Titans the 21st best skill position group? And just taking this a step further, how is the Titans offense going to be bad for fantasy football purposes? I can understand some hesitation because of the unknown. You don't know if Calvin Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins is going to lead the team in receiving. You don't know if Tony Pollard or Tajay Spears is going to lead the team in rushing attempts and rushing yards and production from that standpoint. But taking a chance on one of these guys in a Brian Callahan offense, I think is well worth the risk, because I think this Titans offense is going to be a lot better than people expect. So that's the myth we're busting here, is that the Titans offense will not be good for fantasy football. Look, Brian Callahan is a vastly different philosophical coach than what Mike Vrabel brought to Tennessee. And if you missed it, we just put out the Brian Callahan video earlier this week, breaking down, some of the hallmarks to expect from his offense. Go back in the feed and check that one out. It's just like a 9-minute video. It's not a podcast. So if you're listening to this on audio, you got to go to YouTube to see that one. But Justin, help me bust this myth here. Are the Titans the 21st best skill position group in the NFL?
Yeah, it definitely seems a little low. I will say, acquiring a guy like Calvin Ridley, who had 1,000 receiving yards last year. He joins DeAndre Hopkins, who had 1,000 receiving yards last year. You bring in Tony Pollard, who had 1,000 rushing yards last year. Like, these are, maybe a little outdated, but kind of the benchmarks we use to measure success at those positions, right? Those are proven players. Bringing in a Tyler Boyd, who, yes, is getting older, but has a couple 1,000-yard seasons under his belt and is a clear upgrade in the slot for this passing offense. You improve parts of the offensive line, so they're not going to be as hamstrung as they've been in recent years. So, no, I think 21 is a little low. I will say, again, you took a point right out of my mouth that I didn't think you were going to say. I do wonder if part of this is the hesitancy over, man, I don't know if Hopkins or Ridley's going to be the number one. Like, I'm just going to pass on them for now and draft someone else. Like stuff like that. I get that. I don't know if Pollard or Spears, that could be pushing those guys down, like their ADP.
Yeah.
So I could see why maybe that had a negative impact, and that's how they end up finishing 21st instead of 17th, whatever it would be. Let's say if maybe there was more clear-cut answers at the top. But ultimately, I do think a lot of those guys are going to have a lot of success in fantasy football. What really gets me, before we move on to our next myth, is I want to give you a chance to mention some of the teams that are ranked ahead of them.
Yeah.
Two of them in particular that kind of blew me away.
So two teams that are ranked ahead of the Titans that I do not agree with at all are the Cardinals and the Steelers. Now, the Cardinals just drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. They have, other receivers. Do they?
Not really. I mean, that's what got, like, Michael Wilson is probably the number 2. He looked okay at times last year. They signed Chris Moore from the Titans. He might actually get some playing time. I think, no, they traded away Rondale Moore. There's not a lot. Trey McBride is probably
He's a good tight end.
Is a more draftable tight end than anyone on the Titans roster, I think, from a fantasy football perspective.
For sure. He could be tight end 1 this year, but I mean, Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews notwithstanding.
Top 5. He might be top 5 potentially, right? But the point is, who's the receiver 2, right? Who's the receiver 3?
And we don't even look.
James Conner,
as good as Marvin Harrison is expected to be, he's a rookie. We haven't seen anything. So you can I guess we can just assume he's going to be a top 20 receiver in the NFL as a rookie.
And a target hog. Yeah. I get it for fantasy football. They'll probably be trailing a lot. I think he's going to have an incredible season. I won't lie to you, at least individually. But I have no problem with him because I think he was generational.
Yeah,
but,
I agree with that.
I look at all the other pieces, even James Conner at running back, I think on the wrong side of 30 already. Contract year, very clear they're not bringing him back. They drafted Trey Benson. You could say there's some question marks there. Is Conner going to carry the workload? How much does Benson eat into it? Conner's had injury issues in his past. That's one outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. and I guess Trey McBride. But there's no way that skill position group is better than the Titans.
Yeah, James Conner, 29 for this season. He'll turn 30 next May. But yes, agree with all your points. And then the Steelers, George Pickens looks like he could be pretty good. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, pretty good running back tandem. Probably comparable to Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard, but maybe it's the bias in me. I'm taking the Titans running backs over the Steelers, especially what we've seen from Najee Harris. And just overall offense, Arthur Smith's the new offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh, right? And you got either Justin Fields or Russell Wilson getting those guys the ball. I'm taking Brian Callahan over Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator, and maybe that's sacrilegious in these parts, but Arthur Smith's going to be a run-first, play-action heavy, type of offense, whereas the Titans under Brian Callahan are going to be a pass-first, quick passing game. Like, there's going to be more opportunities, I think, for the Titans skill players to get involved than the Steelers skill players, not to mention the pure talent level of the two teams. I would take the Titans over the Steelers.
I'm gonna bust one of your myths, because Arthur Smith is an offensive coordinator we know can be pretty fantasy football relevant with his style. We saw that firsthand. But where I agree with you is from a talent level, right? Like Najee Harris has not been efficient at running back. They declined his fifth-year option for a reason. Jaylen Warren seems to eat more and more into his workload every year. And then where I really push back on this is at receiver. Like, this will be the first time George Pickens is a number one wideout in his career. We've seen some signs, but there's also been some inconsistencies. But then the rest of the supporting cast, like they trade Deontay Johnson, who effectively was their number one receiver, to Carolina.
Yeah.
You know who the 2 and 3 wideouts are? They're Van Jefferson and a third-round pick in Roman Wilson, the kid from Michigan. So it's like this receiver room comes nowhere near matching Tennessee's, nowhere near. I mean, they don't have they Ridley and Hopkins ahead of Pickens and everyone else, no doubt about it. Like, Pickens would be the number 3 receiver, I think, on this team. Yep. And then the Titans' number 3 receiver, Tyler Boyd, would easily be the number 2, right? I think behind Pickens in that offense. So no, the Steelers, I love their offensive line. They got a better tight end than the Titans have. The running backs, I agree with you. I lean Tennessee, although the difference isn't as big as it is at receiver. But no doubt about it, the Steelers belong lower on this list than the Titans do.
Yeah, I agree. So those are just a couple of little call-outs there, but myth busted. The Titans are going to have a good offense. They're going to have a productive offense. They're going to pass the ball a lot, which is going to lead to high scoring, and I have all the faith that Brian Callahan's offense is going to elevate all of these skill players to, you know, at least where they have been, like with a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, where he has been, with a guy like Calvin Ridley, where he has been, and these running backs and everybody else. I feel like this is going to be a tide that lifts all boats in the offense. And I think this leads very well into our next myth that we're going to bust here, which is about Will Levis. Now, I don't know what the Titans fan perception versus the national media perception, like there's probably some disconnect there. I think Titans fans are a lot higher, at least most of them, the ones who can let the fact that Will Levis did not go to Tennessee go away, like they don't cling on to that, are much higher on Will Levis. But I want to just, like, the idea that Will Levis had a low completion percentage as a rookie, and so he's bad, and that he only threw however many 8 touchdowns to 4 interceptions in like 8 or 9 starts, whatever it was. And like Colts fans and Jags fans are especially running away with the idea that Will Levis is bad and is a bust and is not going to, you know, prove himself this year. I'm going to read off some advanced stats. Now, Warren Sharp has been just like tweeting off random, like, ranking quarterback advanced stats for months now, since like midsummer, maybe even before that.
Crushing it.
He has been. And I'm just going to put some of these stats out there to contextualize some of the areas where Will Levis struggled last year, particularly completion percentage, and show why maybe he is going to be good, especially, again, in the Brian Callahan offense. And now, first one I'm going to go with is highest percentage of passes thrown under pressure. Number 1 in the NFL last year was Justin Fields at 49%, and a lot of that was self-created pressure. And you may call me slightly hypocritical here because I'm not going to say that Will Levis's pressure was self-created. I think Will Levis played behind one of, if not the worst, pass-blocking offensive lines in the league last year. He was second at a 45%. 45% of his passes last season were thrown under pressure. Can we talk about how insanely high that number is?
That's crazy.
Oh, like basically 1 out of every other drop back, he was under pressure throwing the ball. That is crazy. So with improved offensive line, with a more, you know, quick pass offensive philosophy that gets the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly, that makes the reads clean and easy, I think that number is going to drop drastically, which is, of course, going to help Will Levis. Another number, percent of third down incompletions due to receiver error. Will Levis was 7th on this list. 21% of his third down incompletions were due to receiver error. Well, enter Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, along with DeAndre Hopkins, as opposed to relying on a Treylon Burks, a Nick Westbrook-Akina, or whoever else was out there. That number should go down. Will Levis, again, should be better than what we saw last year, and that would help his completion percentage. This one is kind of a weird one. Most efficient quarterbacks versus too high coverages. Will Levis was 9th on this list. some of the names above him are great quarterbacks, so it kind of checks out. CJ Stroud, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love had a great year. Tua, Stafford, Burrow, Allen.
It's not that weird. It's not that weird. The reason I've never seen that one.
Yeah.
The reason I'm cutting in because I really like it because I've had a lot of great conversations with great minds who will all tell you that cover 2, ever since the Kansas City Chiefs became the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, like cover 2 dominates the league nowadays. No one wants to get beat over the top. Yeah. Everyone fears Patrick Mahomes, and cover 2 became the adopted, really, preferred system of every single defense in the league. So that's a really interesting one because that's the coverage you're going to see more often than not in this league. So him having the 9th best success rate against the most common coverage, that's really interesting.
And it also speaks to the fact that, Will Levis, big arm, aggressive mentality, highest average depth of target, we've talked about on the show a lot. Cover 2 is designed to take that away. It's designed to take away the deep shot, which means that if he's the 9th most efficient quarterback against cover 2, he's making the right reads underneath. He's taking what the defense gives him most of the time. Or his arm is so big and he trusts it so much that he's able to even go over the top against cover 2 in some instances, which obviously leads to high success. The reason I say it's a weird one, Patrick Mahomes is 22. Any quarterback stat in which Patrick Mahomes is at 22, I'm going to have some questions about the validity of that stat.
Didn't he have, I think he had the worst ADOT this past year among all starting QBs in the league at like 6 point something. So a lot of that had to do with the lack of receiving weapons, right? Like all the Kadarius Toney and Marcus Valdes-Scantling F-ups. Like that's, I'm going to interject now and just say that we've talked about Will Levis a lot on recent episodes, so I don't want to spend a ton of time, but I think the major disconnect between us, the Titans fans, and the general public is that they don't do as much work as we do into this, right? Like some of the stats that pop out at them, 58.4 completion percentage. It was the worst in the league, right? That right there is going to dominate for national analysts, right? Because they're going to look up that before they look up all the advanced metric stuff, right? And if they do, they could find stuff that supports their argument. In all honesty, the turnover-worthy play rate was 4.5%. That was the 3rd worst mark in the league, right? But as you said, as you start getting to some of the deeper stuff, you look at even like completion percentage over expected. One that I really like, the CPOE. He was 20th in the league out of 31. Not amazing, but not bad, right? Not nearly as bad as it was made out to be. So there are a ton of stats that will point out to you how good he actually was, right? You mentioned the drop. You mentioned the protection. 44.5% of dropbacks. That was second highest in the league, right? In terms of pressured. On his dropback. So there was a lot that went wrong. And then you talk about the receivers. No quarterback in the league last season, just expanding on the stat that you gave, no quarterback in the league last season that had at least 250 pass attempts had a higher drop rate than Will Levis did. 8.6%, according to PFF's charting. It was the highest in the league. Okay, so there's a lot. And look, I could go on all damn day, right? Probably some stats that I've mentioned before. The ADOT we've talked about to death. I just mentioned the CPOE, which was not incredible, but it's a lot better than some of the other stuff
I have a
that's
couple
out there.
I have a couple more. I'll get this one out of the way because I don't know how, like, this one maybe is kind of a stupid stat, just like maybe the other one might have been. Average length of touchdown passes in air yards. Will Levis was second, 21.9. Now, the quarterbacks,
just the Falcons game, right?
Like, and the flea flicker against Jacksonville. When you only throw 8 touchdown passes and 5 of them are like 40-yard bombs, that's going to help. The players surrounding Will Levis on this stat. So Will Levis is second. Number 1, Tyrod Taylor. Number 3, Kenny Pickett. Number 4, Nick Mullins. Number 5, Trevor Lawrence.
Throw that one out the window.
Number 6, Jalen Hurts. But yeah, so that one's kind of silly. But this one, I think is a really good stat. Early down EPA per attempt from a clean pocket. EPA per attempt, expected points added per attempt. If you're not a super advanced stat nerd, you might not know what that is, but it's like generally a way to measure how much value each play adds to your team's ability to score points, right? So early down EPA per attempt from a clean pocket. Will Levis was 5th. I don't really know if the number matters, 0.32 EPA. 5th per attempt from a clean pocket. The quarterbacks above him, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, CJ Stroud. Quarterbacks below him, Jake Browning, number 6, which is interesting because he's playing in the presumably the same offense that Jake Browning was playing in. Derek Carr 8, Josh Allen 10, Dak Prescott 13, Patrick Mahomes 14. So again, any stat that has Patrick Mahomes 14th has to be taken with a little bit of grain of salt. But I think this one's particularly interesting because it's early down only, from a clean pocket only, Will Levis is going to have so many more early down pass attempts in Brian Callahan's offense, and you assume he's going to have a lot more clean pockets given the additions on the offensive line, expected to be 3 or 4 new starters. I think if Will Levis is good, which his stat says he is good, on early downs with a clean pocket, then the Titans offense could take a massive leap from what we've seen.
You know why I'm throwing that stat out the window?
Yeah.
The sample size. He probably had 2 passes on early downs with a clean pocket. Like how many? I'm kidding, halfway, but how many could there have been? Probably not a lot of them. But no, I do like that one. You know what? Myth busted. Will Levis is going to be a good quarterback. Titans fans should be really, really excited. Even if you're a Vols fan, you should be really, really excited about having him as a quarterback of this team. And looking forward to the 2024 season. What's our next myth?
All right, the next myth here is that the Titans have significantly improved their defense. And now this myth is more Titans fans, I think, have this idea. It's like, man, Titans fan perspective. Man, we traded for L'Jarius Sneed. We signed Cheeto Awuzie. We signed Jamal Adams and Kenneth Murray. Like, this defense is going to be amazing this year. Now, this is our only negative myth that we're busting here in terms of like the way we're spinning this is negative for the team. Yes, the Titans vastly improved their secondary, but have they vastly improved their defense? I think we have questions about what Kenneth Murray can be. We have questions about what Jamal Adams is at this stage of his career. We have tons of questions about the depth, and players are going to get injured. It happens every year. The pass rush, where's the real juice coming from? I definitely have questions about this defense. I'm not so sure it's significantly upgraded.
Yeah, I'm on the fence too, largely because the depth, right? Like, life comes at you so fast in the NFL. How much you want to bet, like, by week 4 or week 5, and I hate to say it, but, like, we're going to be like, wow, I did not see TK McClendon Jr. playing so many snaps for this defense, or I didn't see Marlon Davidson, playing 70%. Like, something like that's going to happen, right? Like, it happens every year. Right? Like, whether it was Trey Avery last year or a Garrett Wallow or who was the linebacker, Joe Schobert, like, it happens, right? So we've got major questions about the depth, but it's not just the depth. And Titans fans should know this if you're realistic, but it's like, I don't know what T'Vondre Sweat is going to be. I don't know what Sebastian Joseph Day is going to be and how much he matters, maybe more than I'd like him to this defensive line. I don't know what losing Dinoco Autry looks like, and now Arden Key. Like, Arden Key strikes me as a guy that's at his most effective when fresh.
Right. How
fresh is he going to be when the guys behind him are like Rashad Weaver, Jalen Harrell, Thomas Rush, Caleb Murphy, right? Like, who is playing on the D-line consistently next to Simmons? The off-ball linebackers, massive, massive projections with Kenneth Murray, Jack Gibbons, whoever else gets in the mix there. We love the corners. I absolutely love them. Depth question there. At safety, is it Jamal Adams next to Amani Hooker? Is it Elijah Molden? Did they sign someone? We were recording this about 4 days in advance. Did they sign Quandre Diggs or Justin Simmons? And This is a moot point. But, like, I think you get where I am with this, right? Like, depth is still a massive problem. They couldn't fix it in one offseason. They needed too many starters to worry about who's behind the starters or to overly worry about that. That'll be a next offseason thing, hopefully, right? Where all of a sudden, that's when you upgrade corner 4, pass rusher 2 or 3, inside linebacker 2 or 3, right? Like, that'll be part of Carthon's mission next offseason. But as of now, I'm with you. I've got too many questions. I'm excited about some of the pieces. I'm really excited about Denard Wilson, but I've got too many questions to just sit here and say this defense is going to be way better in 2024 than it was in 2023.
Right. And in 2023, we know they struggled. They struggled against the run specifically, which was a surprise because they'd always been good against the run under Mike Vrabel. And I think some fans view Mike, like, there's different camps in how you view Mike Vrabel looking back now, but, like, the idea that Mike Vrabel was a bad defensive coordinator in Houston, so he wasn't helping the Titans defense at all, I don't think is a valid point. I think Mike Vrabel, especially when it came to game planning against the NFL's best, the Josh Allens, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Mike Vrabel always had an incredible game plan schemed up for those quarterbacks. The Titans beat the Bills multiple times under Vrabel. They beat the Ravens in the playoffs, obviously. Remember that one? And they had good game plans, even though they didn't always beat the Ravens.
Beat the Chiefs 27-3,
beat
right?
The Chiefs twice under Vrabel. Came very close to beating the Chiefs with Malik Willis at quarterback when they couldn't even run an offense, really. We were a field goal away
overtime.
from going.
Primetime game went to overtime.
Exactly.
Malik Willis versus Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. So I will now on the flip side of that is that there were times where it felt like the Titans defense was not prepared for some of the teams that I would consider not as good, or the offenses and quarterbacks I would consider not as good. Like sometimes the Titans played down to their level of competition, and the whole thing about the cornerbacks lining off 10 to 15 yards away from the receivers was a real thing. And, sometimes it felt like the complicated, complex rules of the defense were maybe a little too much for someone like, I don't know, Christian Fulton to handle, who would allow coverages to be busted behind him wide open and things like that, right? Especially when that one year when I think Janoris Jenkins was first signed, and it was like a whole new secondary, and like for the first 7 games of the season, there was like a 60-yard bomb given up once a week.
Yeah.
And then they fixed it and they got the communication right. They put it together. But so there were some complex elements that maybe were difficult for the players to always pick up and play fast. But that said, Mike Vrabel was a good defensive mind, a good strategist, especially game planning those big games. So I think that's a bit of a loss. Now, on the flip side, Denard Wilson is a totally different kind of defensive coordinator in terms of the aggressive mentality. If the Titans are able to use that to force a lot of turnovers, then maybe the defense can be better. But I think to just say that it is significantly upgraded
projection
is a myth. It's a projection. And I think we have busted that myth. What do you think?
Sorry, guys. We had to throw in at least one negative here, but this is one that I firmly believe, unfortunately. I'm excited about some of the pieces. I love Denard Wilson, but we're very much in wait-and-see mode on this defense.
All right, last myth we're going to bust here has to do with Brian Callahan's offense. Now, as I said, we did a video earlier in the week talking about some of the hallmarks to expect from Brian Callahan's offense, but I didn't go super schematically specific in that video, so let's do that now. I think there's a prevailing thought that because Brian Callahan coached under Zach Taylor for 5 years, Zach Taylor coached under Sean McVay, the McVay, Shanahan, LaFleur, wide zone tree, we would assume that Brian Callahan is a student of that tree. I don't necessarily think that's the case. So the myth we're busting here is that Brian Callahan will be running the same type of West Coast wide zone based offense. And I don't think that could be further from the truth. And maybe this isn't a hugely prevailing myth, because I do know some of the smarter minds that cover the Titans, like our buddy Mike Herndon, who has, looked deeply into Bill Callahan's history, and what Bill Callahan has preferred in the run game is what the Titans are going to go with most likely. But anyway, all that to say, Brian Callahan, zone-based scheme, West Coast-based offense because of his time under Zach Taylor and in that LaFleur, Shanahan tree, McVay tree. Where are we falling on the Brian Callahan offense schematically?
Yeah, I get it. I think the one thing that gives me pause here, and it's a myth I want to talk about, it's obviously his father, Bill Callahan, is like an original West Coast offense disciple. I use West Coast offense and wide zone offense kind of interchangeable, right? It's all the Shanahan, McVay, yada, yada. I mean, you could go back to Bill Callahan's days. It was a John Gruden thing, and Shanahan's father, it was his thing, right? So it's like, I use those terms interchangeably, but I do think it's the likely scheme that the Titans will run most frequently. But I do think when I talk about busting this myth, it's to acknowledge that his experience is actually pretty diverse. It's not like that's the only thing he's been exposed to, right? Like when he got his start in coaching, it was under like Josh McDaniels, like way back with the Broncos, I think it was, right? So it's like that was very far away from a wide zone West Coast offense. In fact, it was closer to the one Tim Kelly ran this past season, right? So there are definitely, and then even in Cincinnati, like when they first got there, it was heavy 11 personnel, all kinds of stuff. But after they brought in Joe Burrow and they struggled that first year, he got hurt. Like they had started adopting a lot of those like spread style schemes, zone based under center run game, primarily out of shotgun. Like they've done a lot of different things in Cincinnati. They have not, if you don't watch them, they're not just a West Coast zone offense. Like they do a lot of different things in Cincinnati. And I think that what that tells me, I should say, is that he's willing to adapt to the talent that he has on his roster. Keep in mind in Detroit as well, when he was with Matthew Stafford was it just that 1 year, I think,
2
but
years.
that also, or 2 years, that was not a predominantly, West Coast offense either. They ran a lot of different things. So what that tells me is Callahan's willing to adapt, right? Like he's willing to adapt to the talent on his offense. So I do think that it's worth mentioning that he's not just going to come in here. He didn't just come in here and say, nope, it's West Coast offense. This is what I know. Now, if he feels that's what the Titans players are best suited to run, then that's what it's going to be. But the point is, that's how the decision is going to be made. They're going to be, if he thinks this needs to be a gap power offense, then it's probably going to be more of a gap power offense, right? Like, he's versatile enough to do that. So I think that's sort of the point of that myth.
Yeah, the myth, I guess, then is Brian Callahan is married to a scheme, and that is absolutely a myth. And I'm just going to expand a little bit because you gave some great insights there into his history. But when he started with the Denver Broncos in 2010 as a coaching assistant, which granted he was a very low level assistant there, and then the next 2 years was an offensive quality control coach, again, very low level job there. But Tim Tebow was the quarterback in 2010 for the Denver Broncos. You think that offense was based on anything other than what Tim Tebow ran in college? Tim Tebow was very limited as an NFL player. And then Peyton Manning comes in. That offense has to completely flip itself on its head to run what Peyton wanted to run. And Peyton is dominant, 55 touchdown season. Then the neck injuries catch up to Peyton, and Brock Osweiler and Peyton are interchanging in the offense, and Peyton can barely throw the ball 15 yards down the field towards the end of that season. They have to, again, in the middle of the season, reimagine the offense. Now, Brian Callahan didn't probably have a huge hand in any of that, but he was there. He watched it happen, and he saw the success of it. And then you mentioned the Matthew Stafford era and more with the Bengals. I mean, you talked about the Bengals a lot, which is, I think, the most we can pull from Brian Callahan, like the most concrete evidence we have of what kind of coach he is. But the shift, like when Joe Burrow got there, Brian Callahan's second season after Andy Dalton was there, they started installing a lot of concepts that Joe was familiar with from LSU to help ease his transition to the NFL. They started running a lot more out of shotgun, which I think you mentioned. But when you think of the Shanahan-McVay offense, LaFleur offense, that's like a mostly under center based offense, especially in the run game. But the Bengals were a highly high rate of shotgun team once Joe Burrow got there. And then Joe Burrow gets hurt, and they're, different backup quarterbacks are playing. They have to adjust the scheme again. I think of last year specifically when Jake Browning comes in, and the Bengals became the pass happiest team on early downs because they wanted to set up Jake Browning for success, but not in a way that was making him make complex reads and difficult throws down the field, in a way that was like, oh, Jamar Chase is lined up out wide and the cornerback is 8 yards off the line of scrimmage. So we're going to scrap whatever the play call was, and we're going to turn this play into a quick pass to Jamar Chase, make him make one guy miss and see if he can pick up 10 yards. And if he can't, it's like a successful run play. It goes for 5 yards still. That kind of thing was a development in the season, adjusting to the personnel that he had. And I think that we will see plenty of that in Tennessee. We're never going to see one scheme. In fact, I think the offense we see the Titans run in week 1 is going to look vastly different from the offense we see them run in week 18, right?
Well, I think to summarize, the most interesting thing to me is, like I said, when they got there, it was very much a West Coast, when they first got to Cincinnati, that is very much a West Coast offense. But again, Joe Burrow's there. They start borrowing some of the spread style stuff that he did at LSU and that he was comfortable with. And then all of a sudden, out of shotgun, they're running like a downhill running game.
Yeah.
Like, it was totally different from the West Coast. And then what's even more interesting, by the way, and it shows the adaptability, when he got hurt and it was Jake Browning this past year, it looked a lot more traditional West Coast than it had the rest of the year and in recent seasons under Joe Burrow. So again, adapting on the fly, molding the offense to the strength of the players. That's what you can expect from Brian Callahan. You shouldn't be confident saying with any with any sense of confidence should you be able to say this is definitely going to be a West Coast offense.
Right. And Bill Callahan was a big, preeminent West Coast offense guy, with the other Shanahan, the older Shanahan. But at the same time, he's built this offensive line to be a gap power team. I mean, prioritizing big bodies over the Aaron Brewer versatile move in space guys. And the Daniel Brunskill, it's like, no, we want the Lloyd Cushenberry, who's huge. We want the Sadiq Charles, who's much bigger. Like J.C. Latham.
And none of those guys really run a lot of.
Yeah, it's not like those guys have run a lot of zone either,
right,
in recent years. That hasn't been the case.
So we'll see, TBD, but I do think this is going to be like an offense that is fluid. It's like an amoeba. It's like amenable every week to whatever the defense is most susceptible to and to what, more specifically, what Brian Callahan's players do best. So there we go. Myth busted. How many is that? 4. We busted 4 Titans myths on this podcast. I think that's a pretty good place to probably close things out. What do you think, Justin?
I think so. Those were the 4 we wanted to focus on.
Graver is, I think, on vacation right now.
Yeah,
watch this.
I'm in Switzerland. Just full disclosure for everyone, I'm in Switzerland. So we're recording a bunch of content it's not really the best timing for a trip, right as training camp is getting underway. But I do think we could do something fun, Justin. When I get back, which will be after next week, I'll be back at the end of next week. We could do like a fun episode where you just catch me up on everything that happened at training camp.
We're going to have a loaded episode, at least one, maybe two, on what's transpired at training camp. We apologize that, unfortunately, Graver's trip, you could, send hate mail to him, tweet at him, just give it all, throw it all in his direction.
Where you should send it is in the comments of this video. I want all the comments.
Yes, comment he's an asshole, he's selfish, whatever's on your mind, whatever's on my mind. No, I'm kidding. Say whatever you're feeling, but when he gets back, we promise you, it's not going to be that late into training camp. We will update you guys, and more so than update, you'll probably know, we'll give you our thoughts, because that's what you come here for, I think, is our educated opinions and thoughts on what it means. It might come 2, 3, 4 days late, but we promise you, we will catch you up on everything that's happening at training camp, but more importantly, the in-depth analysis of what it means.
Yeah, and I think what'll happen is I'll come in mostly unprepared and unknowledgeable about anything that's happened at training camp, and I'll just ask you questions from the perspective of our audience, and you can fill me in, and in the process, you fill everyone else in with what it all means. So I think that could be a fun little exercise there, where you just catch me up on the 2 weeks that I missed. But anyway, that does it for this episode. We will have 2 more episodes next week that we're recording now, so full disclosure again, you'll see me in the same t-shirt, 3 straight episodes. We're about to record these, so we'll have content on the feed, and then when I get back, we'll really dive into what's happening at training camp. So until then, I should close this pod up and thank our sponsor, Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville and Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville. Sinkers Beverages is the premier wine, spirits, and beer store in East Nashville, serving the community since 1985. Their knowledgeable staff is proud to help you with large parties, themed events, or finding something unique for a special occasion. From birthday parties to milestone celebrations to everyday moments, Sinkers can help with the right drink for every occasion. And if you head to sinkersbeverages.com or check out the link in this podcast description, you can join the In-Crowd. In-Crowd members get access to allocated wines and spirits, exclusive events, early access to barrel releases, and more. Plus, Sinkers Beverages is on Uber Eats, so the most convenient way to get all the booze you need delivered right to your front door. And again, make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, The Music City Audible. Give this video a like and turn on channel alerts so you get a notification every time we drop a new video. And for the last time on this pod, I will ask you to comment anything below. Tell us what myths you think are going to be busted this year. Tell us if you agree with what we said. Tell us if you hate us for saying that the defense won't be outstanding this season. Just let us know in the comments below, and we will be back next week. So until then, y'all stay safe out there and tighten up.
A Broadway sports media production.